welcome to SoulWhat, a Soultopia podcast with our producer, Matt Stoker. I am your host, Michelle Welch.
And I'm Roger Welch. So what's up today, Michelle?
I'm really excited, as always, to have a wonderful guest on, and she is an author, and we're really excited to have her. Would you like to just shoot right into her bio?
Go for it.
Okay, because she is really fabulous, and now we've got a lot of questions for her, right? Yeah. And I know that my daughter that's in law school is probably listening. She's on her way to Houston, and she's like, Mom, this is the one I wanted to hear. Okay, so she's like, why while I'm driving? I mean, so I am going to go straight to the bio, and I'm going to put on my little readers.
Okay, do that.
I thought it was really cool when I was like 30 to have these. I thought they made me look really kind of smarter. Now I'm like, what the heck? I have to have these again, even with monovision, and they're making me dizzy. So we have with us Brittany K. Barnett. And first of all, you guys, she has written this book that everybody has to get. It's called A Knock at Midnight, a story of hope, justice, and freedom. And it's Brittany K. Barnett. And she's an award-winning attorney and entrepreneur focused on social impact investing. She's dedicated to transforming the criminal justice system and has won freedom for numerous clients, serving life sentences for federal drug offenses, 7 of whom received executive clemency from President Barack Obama. Barnett has founded several nonprofits and social enterprises such as the Buried Alive Project, GEM, or Girls Embracing Mothers, and 16 Capital Partners, and she can correct me if I'm not pronouncing this one right, and Malina Rain LLC. She has earned many honors, including being named one of America's outstanding young lawyers by the American Bar Association. And I know this book has received a lot of nominations and awards. And it's just great. In fact, some of the people who I want to read to you guys, if I can find on the back of the book, just before we introduce her, some of the things that people have said about her. One of the things that I know someone said was it's riveting but devastating at the same time, and I kind of felt the same way. It's devastating to read, but yet it's riveting, and it's a page turner. Let's just go down them. A Knock at Midnight is a book that is just right for the smoldering moment, a memoir that offers an irresistible invitation to examine the evolution and the impact of injustice in America. That's Michelle Norris, contributing columnist at the Washington Post and founding director of the Race Card Project. I'll skip down to Sean P. Holmes. Brittany's passion, ambition, hard work, and commitment to excellence have produced an unparalleled record of success at a young age. I have been personally touched by her incredible dedication to advancing justice and her unwavering and selfless dedication to freedom. Brittany is an angel on earth, and it is time for the world to see the full span of her wings. Welcome to the show, Brittany.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I love your book, and I think I have it on Kindle and the hard copy, and we'll have to get the Audible, right?
Yeah, she's been talking about it nonstop for sure.
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know if you know this, Brittany, if I told you that I'm an attorney also. I'm active, but I don't practice. It's that kind of thing where you keep paying that money, and you keep keeping up that CLE, but you're kind of going, I don't know how to really do this anymore. But you work hard for it, so you keep doing it.
For that. Yeah, I understand. Totally understand. I'm a CPA as well, and I keep up with it. I haven't done accounting in 10 years, but I keep up with that license.
You worked hard for it, right? Right.
Yeah,
so, yeah. So, well, welcome to the show. I'm going to let Roger kick us off. And
Brittany, we're super excited about you being here and everything. And you've made huge differences in people's lives. and your book is so compelling about how your life was guided. But can you tell us a little bit about your background growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in rural East Texas, small town country girl for sure. I grew up in a town where it was probably 150 people, and literally everyone on like this 2 mile stretch of road that I lived on was family. So I grew up in a close knit home, very loving, and it definitely gives you that look and feel of just the South
Yeah.
and the unconditional love, that comes with that. So those are my most fondest memories, and my little sister and I, we played sports. My mom was a nurse. My stepdad worked at the local coal mine. And, we've had a happy childhood. The one thing that began to happen in my elementary school years that really took hold and made life challenging in many ways was that my mother developed a drug addiction. And that, growing up in rural East Texas, I'm an 80s baby. So I grew up, at the height of the war on drugs, and where we're hearing all these messages about just say no, and this is your brain on drugs, and this tough on crime rhetoric, where people are coming in and insinuating only the weakest links fall victim to addiction, and only the most morally corrupt. And here I am trying to reconcile that with my mother, who had fell victim to addiction. And so, I always like to tell like the multidimensional aspect of life, because it was a very challenging time having a mother with the drug addiction, seeing devastation and chaos unfold your tiny arms with your way. And especially when it's your mama, but then that was mixed with such happy times, and really I wanted to show just how nuanced and complex we are as people. And I also wanted to show how joy and pain, can coexist.
It's interesting because East Texas is called quite a large area, but I'm from an East Texas town also called Longview, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of us that say East Texas, but close to Kilgore, and you talk about, I believe, a case or someone in Kilgore. I get my towns a little bit confused, but yeah. So you bring up your mother, and we'll return to that in a second. But one thing that really stood out to me towards the beginning of the book is your dad told you that, before there were any TED Talks or guru people going around, he said that if you want something in life, Brittany, you have to set your intentions. I think this is in chapter 2. Meanwhile, and you just brought it up, people like the DARE DARE would come into the schools and they just say no, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were going around saying people with disease, were morally bankrupt or bad people. And your mom, just as you just said, was struggling. And your dad was, telling you, set your intentions, aim high, set your intentions. But yet you were receiving these kind of over what I believe, and you can tell me what you believe, to be something your mom was struggling with, that was a disease that was going unchecked. And just, I remember that time when we were all hearing that, your brain on drugs, scrambled, the commercials, and just say no, and then the war on crime, so what they called the war on drugs, and not addressing at all the mental aspects of the disease. How'd you feel about that?
Absolutely. It was very challenging, to say the least, trying to reconcile the two. I am so blessed to have had the love from my extended family. I am so blessed to have had the love from my mom, even during her toughest battles. My dad, he would always just pour that into me. He would tell me that I could be anything I wanted to be, and how powerful the mind is, and how we are all authors of our own stories. We have to write our own scripts. And things that he was just pouring into me as a young girl that I really, really cherish and value today.
Yeah.
So you're in Commerce now?
I'm in Dallas.
You're in Dallas. Oh,
No, so she moved to Commerce.
but you moved to Commerce after.
I did.
Okay. And then,
For high school.
okay. And then you have a quote in there from the ACLU director that's saying that marijuana charges were tools of law enforcement to target people of color, and 34 times more people of color were charged than white despite equal usage.
Do you remember that quote? Yeah, that really stuck out to us. It really stuck out to me. It doesn't surprise me, to be honest with you, and that's horrible to say. But given the fact that I worked at the DA's office in Dallas in 1987, and I can't say that number surprises me, but 34 times more people of color were charged than whites despite equal usage. Do you have any comment on that? Anything to add to that? I mean, it was just... And you know what else struck me is just when you moved to Commerce, some of the things that you saw around the square and the statues, and the things that were around, and just how you described the city when you moved there. You had love around the city, but also what was around the city.
Yeah, just these reminders. These statues of Confederate soldiers, these stark reminders of such an oppressive history that is just quite frankly rooted in systemic racism. And so when I was researching and learning more about just how this war on drugs was impacting real people, and I saw that people of color were 34 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana offenses, it was, as you mentioned, Michelle, not surprising, but it's still a jolt, like a sting. Yeah. And it's such a sting because it really shows that at this point, it is beyond legitimate debate that this nation's criminal laws bleed with racial injustice. And what I wanted to show with showing those numbers in the book, is really showing how this impacts real people and real lives. It's not a joke.
Mm-hmm. What year was that? Do you remember approximately? Do you mind saying? I mean, can you quickly, because I'm just curious comparing it, because I have always said from when I was prosecuting, it was no joke. I mean, I look back on it and I know for a fact, even when I started doing criminal appeals, I would be appointed by the judge. You get one free appeal, and it was just completely disparate. I mean, it just was completely obvious that there was racism involved. So I was curious about what year that was.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact year of that statistic, but the statistics got higher in the early to mid 90s into the late 90s, honestly. And even the early 2000s, we still saw statistics that were staggering.
Right.
How is it today? Has it gotten better today compared to when, I mean, some of that's 10, 20 years ago. Has it gotten better?
I don't think that the statistics as it relates to the number of people of color incarcerated for drugs has gotten better. I will say the laws have made progress in the area of reform to where it has lessened the penalties that come with it. But I think the numbers of people of color impacted by this utter failure of a war on drugs is pretty stagnant. For example, in the federal system, even today, nearly 70% of people in federal prison today for drug offenses are people of color.
And probably from what I've seen, even a lot of those, because they've been there for more than a minute, the laws of today, those people probably wouldn't be there anyway.
And that's what she's working on.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And it's so fascinating that you bring that up because it's something that still shocks the conscience to me. We've made all this progress, or you have people even politically from both sides of the aisle. You have bipartisan support for criminal justice reform, and we have laws changing. We have just a drastic change in the in the legal landscape surrounding sentencing issues. But as you mentioned, the most mind-boggling part is we see laws changing, but they're not being made retroactive.
So,
So what that means is we have people in prison today under yesterday's drug laws, and that very much shocks the conscience.
So, and I've got a friend and from Colorado, and he got kind of caught with some stuff, got in a little trouble, and of course, it's on his record, and he's like, well, I could go back to Colorado, get it expunged, or and taken off of his record now compared to the laws. But how does a person that's if they are in prison for something that's no longer illegal today, what's their course of action to try to get that taken off and get out of prison? Is there an option?
There's not. That's the sad part about it. The only option they have technically is clemency, executive clemency from the President of the United States of America. And that is truly the sad part. That's truly the sad part. And I'll give you an example to break it down for viewers. The mid-90s, we saw this heightened war on drugs, and we saw President Clinton in the 94 crime bill, and we saw this 3 strikes and you were out laws on the federal level, which means your third drug felony is a mandatory life without parole sentence. That was one of the most ridiculous laws ever. And the First Step Act reformed that. The First Step Act was signed into law in 2018 by President Trump. And it says, okay, your third drug felony is not mandatory life without parole anymore. It's mandatory 25 years, which is still a long time. And your 2 drug priors had to be serious drug felonies, meaning you had to have gone to prison and they had to have occurred within the past 15 years. So you put that into human form and you look at Chris Young, one of my clients who was 22 years old from Clarksville, Tennessee, who suffered a suffocating level of poverty no child in America should have to endure, who as a teenager was arrested at 18 for 7 grams of crack cocaine. He was arrested at age 19 for less than 0.5 grams of crack cocaine. The total quantity of crack cocaine in both of his priors weighed less than 3 pennies. And then you have Chris Young getting caught up in a federal drug conspiracy at the bottom of the totem pole of this offense. But it's his third drug felony. And the prosecutor, in his sole discretion, chose to enhance Chris Young's sentence. And Chris Young received a mandatory sentence of life without the possibility of parole for a crime offense he committed at the age of 22, a drug offense. His sentence was so severe that even the federal judge expressed great judicial reluctance from the bench. He did not want to have to sentence Chris Young to life, but his hands were tied because of the mandatory nature of the laws. Well, here comes the First Step Act, and neither one of Chris's prior drug felonies would count against him for the 3 strikes. So he would be walking out of the door, but the First Step Act was not made retroactive as it related to the 3 strikes law.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing that can be done other than a plea to the president on these federal cases, a plea for mercy. Clemency to me is where justice meets mercy. And so there's no recourse at all through the courts when these laws aren't made retroactive. And that's the part that's so heartbreaking. It's because we do have people serving life sentences today under yesterday's drug laws. And what I think, and that I didn't know as a law student learning about these issues, was there's no parole in federal prison. So a life sentence is life without parole. And I think it's important for us to really hold on to what that means, life. I think we throw around sentences in the criminal justice system, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, like it's $10 or $15. And we don't stop to think of just how long that is. That's a long time. 10 years is a very, very long time. And then we throw out sentences of life without parole for people like Chris Young for drug offenses, and we just need to really hold on to that concept of time. Life without parole is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. Chris Young was serving the same amount of time in prison as the Unabomber.
Yeah. Wow. And I have some questions, but we'll get back to that. I want to take it back to even how your mom, I believe, served 2 years. Is that correct? And how long that seemed to you and your sister, I believe, Jazz.
Yeah.
And so how long that seemed to you. And you would describe seeing her, and I think you described her in her, she came into court and it looked like almost like a Looney Tunes costume is what, as I don't remember how old you were, but just seeing her, walk into, and of course y'all tried to smile at each other and you tried to build each other up because this was your mother and you knew your mother as a loving mother with a problem. And what I mean by problem is a disease and somebody who really was just trying to do her best. And so for 2 years, you and your sister tried to go see her. She pulled chain pretty quickly. She got pulled, went from county jail or, local jail to prison pretty quickly. I used to go, I will tell you guys that it was pretty bad when I used to do these. I did appeals and I would be told, oh, don't even worry about the appeals when I get a court-appointed appeal. Oh, don't worry, that's a challenge to me. I'm going to try even harder. The overturning rate's only like 5%. I mean, the things we were told back then was crazy. And that's, I'm like, oh no, my rates. And then it becomes real when you're working with, it's not just on paper. But 2 years was a lot to you. And, you guys would go see and you tell stories of Jazz, forgetting her ID and things. And you really do make it so real about what it is for people who don't know. But there's a lot of community that do know about going in and seeing their father or their mother or their loved one, their spouse, their child incarcerated. There's a segment of the community that does know about that because of those crazy laws. And I remember those crazy laws being implemented and those 3 strikes, you're out, basically. Mm-hmm. And so up until, just to circle back a little bit, up until about 6th or 7th grade, I'm still in one of your questions here.
That's okay.
Yeah. You never wavered from wanting to be a lawyer. And it's interesting because it was 6th grade when I thought I wanted to become a lawyer too. Mm-hmm. For some reason, 6th grade. I think I liked just carrying around a big old book. I was like, oh, this is about being a lawyer. But no, I really wanted to be a lawyer. But at that time, you talk about this in your book, you were dating a drug dealer, right? And at some point, he, I believe, got on a different form of, he got on maybe crack. Is that what? And something happened. He became very abusive. And I bring this up also because we had Jan Langbine on from Genesis Women's Shelter last week. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted you kind of address, I don't know if that's what changed, but you said circumstances over time, things changed, but yet, you then did become an accountant. You became a civil lawyer, and then in your spare time, you guys, just everybody listening and viewing, all the things we're going to talk about that Brittany has done, a lot of this is all pro bono, she did in her spare time. So what happened with that, and how did that change your view on things of having this boyfriend that kind of turned on you like that just because of a lot of it because of the drug, maybe?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable from The Cosby Show.
Yes.
And, growing up, unfortunately, there aren't many lawyers in rural East Texas, and there certainly weren't any lawyers who looked like me.
Right.
And as I got older, I just started feeling like becoming a lawyer was out of my league. It was something that I couldn't obtain. In hindsight, I realized it was because I didn't know any. And there's this power in proximity, and there's this power in representation. And so I got off track of that dream of becoming a lawyer, but I always maintained good grades. And when I got to high school, I started hanging out with a lot of people who were from my culture, who gave me life and love. And it was just a beautiful experience. But unfortunately, I grew up during a time where some involvement in drugs was the norm. You either knew someone selling drugs or doing drugs, sadly. And I dated a drug dealer in high school. And I think my dreams of becoming a lawyer had faded even before then. And when I started to date him, sadly, it was something we didn't even think much about. I knew that he sold drugs, but I didn't know a whole lot about his dealings other than he was a drug dealer. And so I never thought a lot about it. And what was so powerful for me during that time and has always been is books. And even though becoming a lawyer started to seem out of my league, I read a book in high school. It was a B.B. Moore Campbell book called Brothers and Sisters. And in the book, the protagonist was a Black woman who worked at a bank. And she seemed to have a pretty good life. Other people that worked at the bank as vice presidents, et cetera, seemed to be doing well. And from reading that book, I said, okay, I'm going to go to college and major in finance and accounting. And that's how I got on the track to accounting and getting a master's in accounting and becoming a CPA. Really, honestly, was from reading that book. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book as well. Of course, I wrote it to tell the truth about racial injustice that bleeds through the system. And I wanted it to tell the truth about the heartbeats. But I also wrote a book for young girls of color from the South to hopefully be able to see themselves in me as I saw myself in that character in that B.B. Moore Campbell book.
Right. Well, I also feel like, it ties in because you do say, and I put it kind of in one statement, you did mention church, and that church at a time, a well-spoken word at a certain time can make a difference in someone's life, and that has been one of the few places in America where Black people can be free. And I can tell you that I've heard that from my Black friends and often from my clients here at Soultopia. They'll say, because they come in saying, can I come in a place like this and still go to church? And I'm like, yes, you can. You can believe whatever you want to believe. We're not trying to tell you not to believe something. I go to church. I was raised in church. But also, breaking up, and I'm not sure if I have your words exactly right. You ended that kind of paragraph with also breaking up with that cycle, and that abuser made you feel free. And I think that's an important part that you also put in the book, just for anyone. It's just important that we put that in the book. And it just tied in so perfectly with Jan from Genesis being on last week, and such an important message. So that was powerful for me. Yeah.
And in 2004, that power of intention worked, but your mom had always made it to big events, but she missed the master's graduation.
Yeah.
How did that all go down and for you?
Yeah. So my mom, even in addiction, she always showed up. She was always present for us. And when I was graduating with a master's degree, my mother was not there, and it was because she couldn't be. She was in prison. Her addiction had ultimately led to her being sentenced to prison. And that was heartbreaking. It was like a gaping hole in my chest to know that on a day where I was so proud, my mama was in a concrete prison cell and that she couldn't be there. And it just made me reflect so much on how mass incarceration just devastates families and entire communities. I know firsthand that when one person goes to prison, the entire family goes to prison. And my mother had a drug addiction. My mother needed treatment. She needed rehabilitation. She did not need prison. And I think that experiencing that firsthand, it really gave me this burning desire, to raise awareness and attention to this issue. You know, in East Texas at the time, there were no alternative drug courts. There were no diversion programs. And my mother received time in prison. Even though she wasn't there when I graduated, I knew she was there with me in spirit, but it definitely doesn't take away the pain.
Yeah. And, you know, you do make, and we may talk about this later, but you also you tied it back into, it's Sharanda, right? Yes, Sharanda that we'll get to. I promise we will, because Sharanda's story's in here a lot. But that dehumanizing, one of the most dehumanizing things is the number that they give inmates, and they want to know that number. And then, you know, you remembered when you met Sharanda in person, you had her number, but you were going back and replaying your mom's number. Yeah. That had to be, you know, hard. But also the fact that when your mother got help, you were I felt this so strongly in the book, almost like, you know, shaking your finger, saying, don't even try to tell me that rehab or prison or whatever helped my mother get better. That is not what helped my mother get better. My mother helped my mother get better. Is that true? Because that's how it felt to me in the book.
It's so funny you say that, Michelle, because I wrote that with so much intention. I wanted people to read that and understand that my mother became sober despite of prison, not because of it. Because I never want anyone to feel that prison is a place to treat drug addiction. Yeah. And it's so, it really warms my soul that you felt that, because I definitely wrote it with that type of intention of like showing that determination and will of my mother in the face of a system designed to break her spirit.
Yeah, to break you, not to help build you up or to help you get better. I totally agree with you. And I have chills, and I had chills when I read it too. So at some point, you want to get to Obama at the top of he's elected. So you want to talk about that?
So Obama was elected. Of course, many of us were very happy, but you still had one word that stood out to you in cases, and that word was disparity. So you become
emphasis on disparity, right?
So you became involved at SMU Dedman School of Law in Professor Lacey's critical race theory class. Could you expound?
Yes, that class. I was a CPA, and I was going to practice corporate law. It was a natural gravitation for me as an accountant. I had landed a job at a law firm in my second year of law school. So I kind of coasted through the rest of law school, taking classes that were interesting to me. And I signed up for this critical race theory course, a small class at SMU, Dedman School of Law. And in the class, we analyzed the intersection between race and the law. And I was writing my paper about the disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and how in 1986, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act implemented this 100-to-1 ratio. And so what that means for people who may not know is one of you could have 500 grams of powder cocaine. I could have only 5 grams of crack cocaine, and we're going to receive the same sentence in prison. And it's not lost on anybody now, and especially in the late 80s, that more affluent white people were using powder cocaine, and crack cocaine was running rampant through communities of color, in particular Black communities. And so this 100-to-1 ratio created a hugely disproportionate sentencing as it related to people of color, whereas I mentioned before, 70% of the people in federal prison today are people of color for drug offenses. And so I'm writing my paper and learning about these laws and how they were implemented and the racial implications from it. But I wanted to show the heartbeats behind those numbers. And one night in the SMU Underwood Law Library, I was doing a Google search, and the case of Sharanda Jones popped up. And that is the case that would change my life forever.
Yeah. So when you discovered her case, tell us how it felt to you. So you found a YouTube video, right? I mean, you found a couple of other things, and then I think maybe a couple of other cases or something, but then finally you found a YouTube video and you watched that. And I think you were sitting with somebody, and I can imagine it because I actually taught an adjunct class there at SMU. So I can imagine sitting there, and somebody else was in their little preppy shirt, and they were studying their torts law, and then you're like, whoa, this is about to change my life because this is not right. And so somebody was interviewing her or something, and you watched the YouTube video, and then that was it. So can you tell me kind of what happened sitting in that library?
Yes, it was so touching. Sharanda Jones, I saw so much of myself in her. She was also a Black daughter of the rural South like me. She had this country, East Texas accent, gorgeous woman, except the difference was I was in my second year of law school at SMU, and Sharanda was serving her 10th year of a life without parole sentence for a federal drug offense. Her first conviction, felony or otherwise, Sharanda had never even received a traffic ticket before.
Right, that's what I said. She had never, I was going to say, had she ever even had a parking ticket?
Never had a parking ticket before. And I'm just like, how did this happen? And so I knew I wanted to include her paper in my story to really humanize this issue of how the war on drugs was devastating families and communities, and how these life without parole sentences were given out so flippantly. And so I wrote about her story in my paper, but she just tugged at my soul. And I sent her a card. I told her I was a law student and I was going to practice corporate law. I told her I knew next to nothing about criminal law, but I told her that I was going to get her out of prison.
At first, was she kind of like, yeah?
She was like, she wrote me back. I still have the letters from 2009, and she was so nonchalant. She thanked me and she wished me well in my studies. And that was it. You could tell she had a very nonchalant response. She tells me when she read it, she was like, yeah, right. Like, how's this law student with no criminal law experience going to get me free? But it started a very beautiful relationship and a 6-year journey that led to Sharanda Jones's freedom. She received clemency from President Barack Obama. I worked on her case for 6 years, and she served 16 years and 9 months of a life without parole sentence. And she's free now. She was freed in 2016. She's doing amazing. She was an amazing cook before prison. She had her own restaurant, and she's working now. In the next couple of months, she's going to launch a food truck, and she's going to hire formerly incarcerated people to work her food truck. It'll be called Fed Up.
It's perfect.
A play on being fed up with the system, and your bellies are truly going to be fed with some great food. And Sharanda Jones received her very first traffic ticket a few months ago, and she fought that traffic ticket and had it dismissed in court. So Sharanda Jones still has not ever technically received a traffic ticket.
So this question that Roger's going to ask you kind of explains how we got there to her getting such a long sentence, because her sentence was what?
Life.
Her sentence was life, you guys, when she had never had a parking ticket. Okay,
and I'm kind of curious because I didn't actually see that part, but I mean, what did she have? Like a truckload of cocaine? I mean, to get that?
No, and that's why I want you to ask that question right there.
So, yeah. So, Professor Udashin explained to you about the conspiracy?
Yes. Okay. Yes. This was what was so mind-blowing. So when I read it, I thought, okay, Sharanda, was she like a queen pin? She hadn't been trafficking major quantities of drugs. Did somebody die? I had all these thoughts going through my mind when I saw she had this life without parole sentence as a first-time offender. And Sharanda Jones was giving a life sentence under these federal drug conspiracy laws. And it's mind-blowing because these laws are so broad and encompassing, and there's this concept of ghost dope in federal drug conspiracy. And what I learned was Sharanda Jones was never caught with any drugs ever. She was never caught selling drugs on any surveillance. She was never caught with large sums of money. No physical evidence whatsoever. Because of this concept of ghost dope in the federal system, you can be held accountable for a quantity of drugs that co-conspirators testify against you about. And so Sharanda Jones's co-conspirators testified against her at trial in exchange for lesser sentences. And they said Sharanda was trafficking multiple kilograms of powder cocaine from Dallas to Houston. And that is how they came up with the quantity of drugs. And because of this 100-to-1 sentencing ratio and disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, that only helped solidify this life sentence for her. And I make no excuses or justifications about it. Sharanda Jones was involved in selling drugs. She served as a middlewoman between drug dealers in Houston and Dallas, and she trafficked drugs a handful of occasions from Dallas to Houston and received approximately $1,000 to $5,000 for each drive. The drug supplier in her case, who admitted to trafficking hundreds of kilograms of powder cocaine, he testified against Sharanda at trial and received less time than she did. As a matter of fact, by the time I took Sharonda's case in law school, the drug supplier was already out of prison. So all of her co-defendants pled guilty, and she utilized her constitutional right to go to trial, and it cost her life.
So they didn't even catch her with anything. Nothing at all. It was just basically what somebody else said she helped with.
Absolutely. It was all based on this ghost dope relevant conduct quantity. And it was so just confusing to me as well. But the more I started learning about federal law and learning more about Sharonda's case, and as I took on other cases, even today, over 10 years later, 90% of the people I've represented, of the people I've helped free from these life sentences, 90% of them had no drugs, were never caught with any drugs, no large sums of money, all based on the testimony of co-conspirators and this concept of ghost dope.
Somebody takes the money for a boyfriend. I think the story was in there. They take it to the wire place to get the money, and that puts them in the loop, right? That puts them in the loop. And then you found some mistakes made by her lawyer. You know what? She had they were trying to show that she was responsible. She went and got a gun in the proper way. A responsible citizen would do that, but then that gave her points, in the point system. So that was 2 points, and then there was a 4-point enhancement, and so that this caused more disparity even, right?
Caused more disparity. She even got a 2-point enhancement for testifying on her own behalf at trial. And because she was found guilty, the judge found that she had to have committed perjury on the stand, and she received a 2-point enhancement for obstruction of justice.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy.
Oh, so you and I have something in common, that our favorite Supreme is RBG. And so, and you had a glimmer of hope with some cases, but you've already mentioned. So you found some cases, you found some things as you were doing all your research, and then some things started to happen, but they weren't applied retroactively. And so I actually had a text of that photo. There was a thing out of the book. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick, because I was like, hold on, let me see. I screenshotted a lot of this because it was so good. Well, one of it is that we would punish addiction in this country. This is one thing this is off the subject, but we punish addiction in this country, treating it as a moral flaw instead of an illness. Prison does not bring redemption, and it does not cure or treat addiction. That enormous victory belongs to Evelyn Fulbright, not to the institution that tried to break her spirit this my mother got sober despite the suffering she endured in prison, not because of it. And I highlighted that and I screenshotted it. So just so you know, you did make your point. But as I read further, my heart sank. Kimbrough v. United States was not made retroactive. The decision would help people in Sharonda's situation going forward, but it couldn't undo what had already been done. In fact, under Booker and its progeny, I was procedurally barred from getting Sharanda back into court. None of this made any sense. If a law is wrong today, wasn't it wrong yesterday? And shouldn't the people in prison because of it get another shot at justice? I had learned in law school that there was a limit to a lawyer's use of creativity. We were bound by the law, but increasingly it seemed that we were bound by laws entirely outside the bounds of moral consciousness. I love that. And so you ran into this, that you've already spoken about, this, that they were not going to be applied retroactively. So that's when this Fair Sentencing, the Fair Sentencing Act came in, and you thought that from Obama, you thought, okay, this is going to do it. And then that was not applied retroactively, right? So for people knowing that, this means, it's not applied to those cases that came before. You can't go back and reapply them. So then, what did you do? What do you do?
The only option I had was to apply for clemency from President of the United States of America. And for people who don't know, as I mentioned before, clemency to me is where justice meets mercy. It is an exclusive power granted to the President of the United States through the Constitution. And it is a tool that's also granted to state governors through state constitutions. And this was literally the only option that I had to get Sharanda Jones free. And there's two forms of clemency. One is called a commutation, which is a reduction in sentence. The other form of clemency is a pardon, which completely forgives you for the crime and wipes the conviction off your record. And so I was pursuing a sentence commutation form of clemency for Sharanda Jones to get her life sentence reduced.
And you got other people. You didn't hear about Sharanda first. You heard about, there was somebody. What was his name? You heard about him.
Donald Clark.
Yeah, you heard about Donald Clark first. And another thing that you knew is that a lot of it was about telling your client's story in a way that it makes it impossible to ignore. Somebody had given you that advice, for when you're going for clemency, to tell that story. So could you tell me a little bit about, is Donald Corey, is that who you just said?
Donald Clark.
Oh, Clark. Okay. I was also wanting to know about with Corey and the synchronicity. Tell us a little bit about that. And y'all did a little bit of, you found some synchronicity with the number 16. And I wanted to kind of make sure we had time to get that in, and what happened with that.
Yes, absolutely. So on the heels of Sharanda Jones's release, I had other clients get free. In the meantime, in between time, I got to really experience this enormous elation of joy from several of my clients receiving clemency from President Barack Obama. And I had said, I'm done. I'm not taking any more cases. I want to focus on my corporate career. But then the case of Corey Jacobs came to me, and it was identical to Sharanda Jones. He had never been in any trouble before. He was serving his 16th year of a life without parole sentence. And I was determined to get Corey Jacobs free. And I only had about 10 months to do so. I didn't have 6 years like I did with Sharanda, because President Obama was leaving office. And so I always try to get to know my clients, just really get to know them, get intimate with their case files. And Corey and I developed a relationship through the federal email system called CoreLinks. And I was literally working on a multi-million-dollar deal, acquiring a company in Brazil. I was in-house counsel doing mergers and acquisitions by that time. And Corey, who's serving these 16 life sentences, he taught me how to meditate from prison. Now he's serving life.
Right.
I'm living my free life, and he's teaching me how to meditate from prison. And I will never forget, I went to visit him for the first time in prison, and Corey is phenomenal. He's full of charisma. He's positive, just a brilliant, brilliant guy. It really shows his human capital we're locking away forever in this country. And he told me during our visit that he had once read that meditation could enhance that nature could enhance the meditation experience. But he hadn't seen a tree in years. And Corey continued to talk, but I could not move past the fact that he had not seen a tree, because the prison yard was surrounded by a 12-foot concrete wall, and there were no trees on the yard. And so I just could not move past the fact he had not seen a tree. And I left there feeling empowered and just wanting to use my platform as a lawyer for the greater good. And Corey and I began to meditate together after that. And we would meditate at 8:16 because his number 16 meant so much to him and it meant so much to me. We found similarities everywhere with his number 16. My full name is 16 letters. His full name is 16 letters. He was serving his 16th year. Sharanda Jones had served 16 years. My clients, I had 2 clients that were freed on the 16th day of certain months. And so we just found just so much power in this spiritually charged number of 16. And we would start meditating at 8:16 every morning together. Him, of course, in a maximum security prison, and me in my apartment before work. And it was just the most powerful experience. We would set our intentions on his freedom. That would be our anchor. And I honestly can say, I work hard on these cases. There's no doubt about it. But I totally feel that my clients and I also manifest their freedom. And Corey and I did through this meditation experience and through this, this powerful number of 16, on top of the fact that Corey Jacobs was serving 16 life sentences for federal drug offenses, his first ever convictions. Felony or otherwise. And so that number meant so much to us, and gracefully President Barack Obama at the end of his term granted clemency to Corey Jacobs. And so within that 10 months, freedom was won there. And during that 10 months too, I took a huge leap of faith, and I resigned from corporate law to truly follow my passion to transform this nation's criminal legal system.
Right.
So Brittany, you had one that took you 6 years and one 10 months. I mean, what's kind of the average that people work on those to get somebody, to even to that level for the president to look at it?
Oh, it just varies so much. There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no transparency from the Office of the Pardon Attorney with this clemency process. Like I said, Sharanda Jones was the longest at 6 years. I've had others 4 or 5 years. I had one that took 3 months, and I had others that took several months as well. And I even, have worked and secured clemency throughout administrations. I had 4 clients receive clemency from Donald Trump, and those took months, some of those took a couple of years. It all just varied. And unfortunately, there's no way to really know. There's no way to really know.
Yeah. And then, because presidents, obviously they get so busy, there's a whole process to make it through that. Is there do they try to look at X amount of files per year or per president or anything like that?
I don't know. I wish they were more transparent with the process. I don't think there's a quota per se, and I'm just hopeful that we see with this administration just this clemency process reinvigorated, and many more clemencies coming down at a much greater rate and a much larger quantity of people, because there really and truly is nothing more urgent than freedom.
Well, and I think everyone needs to read your book to understand if there's any naysayers out there, and I'm sure there might be, who think, oh, what do you mean letting people out? Well, read the book before you think that. Because listen to what we're saying. She never had a parking ticket. And Brittany's not trying to say that she didn't do anything. But the disparity in the punishment clearly did not fit the crime. And I can tell you from when I was prosecuting back in the day, and then the criminal appeals that I did do, and it wasn't a few, it was quite a few. They're looking at them. They weren't fair. I mean, there would be a case, even murder cases, that were tried in 1 or 2 days, and they were murder cases. And so and you just look at them and you just go, that would not happen. And there was racism involved. It was systemic racism. And I know that for a fact. I've said that since all the way back then to now, and people can, think what they want. I know it for a fact because I lived it. And I wasn't the one who had tried the case. I was the one working on it on appeal, on defense. That's what I did. Or I would help people preserve their error for appeal in certain cases. But, before anybody jumps to some conclusion and is ignorant, to be blunt, in forming an opinion about that, they need to look at what you're talking about. You're not saying just let everybody out who's done something. You're saying look at a broken system, because I think it is a broken system and it's improved to some extent. But what do you think the state of the judicial system is now regarding drugs and how we're treating mental illness regarding drugs?
Yes, I think that a lot of progress has been made, but I think we still have so much more work to do. The laws are changing, public perception is changing, attitudes are changing, whether it's from a moral space or whether it's from an economic space, or that we're spending too much money, too much taxpayer dollars on incarceration. I just think there's so much more work to do. I think that the system is ill in its design and it has to be transformed. We have to completely reimagine what justice looks like. And I love how now we are looking at addiction as a public health issue when we look at the opioid crisis, for example, and how we're treating it as a public health issue.
Right.
I also feel that the crack epidemic in the late 80s was a public health issue as well, but it wasn't looked at as so. It was criminalized and demonized and the people were vilified. And I think that we have to be honest with ourselves about that, be honest with ourselves about the different demographics of people who are impacted by opioids versus crack in the 80s. And we have to have equity and equal playing fields. And it's all a public health crisis. And unfortunately, because of this stigma and this tough on crime rhetoric that was implemented during the crack epidemic, we still have people who have been serving decades buried alive under these draconian federal drug laws. And the time is now, to really do what's right and restore a sense of fairness that is supposed to be at the heart of this criminal legal system.
And the Buried Alive project, it says in your book, works to dismantle life without parole sentences handed down under outdated and inhuman federal drug laws through transformative litigation, legislation, and humanization. Am I saying that? Humanization. For further information, please visit, is this still right? buriedaliveproject.org. And then Twitter also at Buried Alive Proj, PROJ, Instagram at Buried Alive Project. And then still Girls Embracing Mothers empowers girls with mothers in prison to break the cycle of incarceration and lead successful lives with vision and purpose. For more information, please visit. And we'll put these in the information to girlsembracingmothers.org, and we'll put the Twitter and the Instagram where that can be found. What is next for you, Brittany?
It's so much to do, right? As I was writing the book, it took me 2 years to write the book, and reflecting on it, it really gave me a chance to think. And I know that we cannot keep rescuing people from prison and restoring them to poverty. And I know that some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met in my life, Michelle, have been my clients. And so I see this untapped potential, this ingenuity that America needs to thrive. And so I'm working now to really think through how can I merge my corporate experience, with my passion to transform the criminal legal system and really help invest in justice impacted entrepreneurs to put them in positions to thrive and not just survive, to truly flourish, because that really benefits us all. And so I'm really working to continue to hold this vision of creating sustainable liberation for people that is much more than just getting them from behind prison walls. You know, it includes economic liberation and equity, and just ensuring that justice impacted people are given access to resources, you know, to truly have an impact on this world. And that, to me, creates systemic change.
Right. Well, you're fascinating. You've done wonderful things. You're an incredible person to meet. It's my honor. We really appreciate having you on the show. You're welcome back anytime.
Anytime at all.
Yes. I'd love to meet with you sometime in Dallas. And that is, yes, and enjoy the rest of your working vacation, your work vacay, whatever that is, right? And thank you for joining us so much. And that is our show for tonight. We want to thank Max Stoker so much. And we do want you to know to go and get Brittany's book. We didn't list all the awards it's received, you guys, but you can look them up. It's been like, has a big old billboard in Times Square. It's like this huge billboard of Brittany's book. It's like amazing. You look at, when you go to Times Square and you look at them, and it's like the biggest picture, like billboard up there, there's her book. And so it's A Knock at Midnight, a story of hope, justice, and freedom by Brittany K. Barnett. She's incredible. And we, on all of our podcast platforms and social media, you can also find where to find her as well. And this thing is driving me crazy.
I could tell.
And but thank you all for joining us, and where we discuss, especially tonight, matters that are important to our soul, and you listeners and viewers get to discern and decide how to make a difference and what's important to your souls. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, guys.
Good night.